Thank you all. It's a real honor to be here. And I am going to start by just confessing that I'm sort of daunted. Following James and Kathy is going to be a hard act. I thought I was so relieved that I didn't have to follow Kevin Cosby, but this is really quite daunting. So I'm the nerd, I'm the geek. I'm the one who's going to talk to you about technology and data and sort of what is coming down the pike. Mike Harold last night said something I thought that was really wise, which is if we don't get rolling, we are going to get flattened by the change that is coming at us. That's true in education, that's true in healthcare. And what I am going to try to do is draw on my experience in both of those fields, healthcare and education, because I see so much similarity, and talk about what's coming and maybe some lessons we can draw out of them. 2013 was the most exciting year of my professional life, and most people would be kind of surprised by that, because I spent most of the year deeply immersed in the odd combination of public education and health insurance purchasing exchanges. Not on anybody's sort of top 10 or 20 or 30 list of most fun places to be in 2013, I suspect. But there are amazing similarities between the two industries. And let me just kind of list them, and then I'll jump into kind of what is happening in the data and IT-informed worlds of healthcare and education. Each of these sectors is critical to our individual, local, and national success. These are quite literally the part of the economy that are too big to fail. Each is dominated by educated professionals. Each is driven by third-party payment structures, which mean that the person who receives the education or the healthcare is not the same as the person who pays for it, which makes them different than the rest of our economy. Each struggles with archaic organization and has been immune, essentially, to the forces of technology and globalization that have upended so much of the rest of the economy. Immune so far. And finally, each of them is under enormous pressure from angry citizens who believe that we are not getting value from the money that we spend on healthcare and education. Each of them also seems to me to be on the cusp of enormous positive change. I think great things are coming, and let me try to tell you why I think that. Let's start with just a local example here. What do we mean when we talk about big data, technology, and its potential? We all are customers of UPS, or we get packages from them. Many of us probably already know that in 2011, UPS decided to become a little bit greener as a company. They decided they needed to be more environmentally conscious, and they needed to make more money, green in a double way. So they set about analyzing their delivery routes. And by combining GPS data with information from fuel efficiency sensors, measuring which routes were hillier or were driven faster or slower, they were able to identify 85 million miles of cuts in their regular routes that they could make with zero impact on customer satisfaction. They saved 8.4 million gallons of fuel annually as a result. And just to put 84 million miles in perspective, it's about 93 million miles from the Earth to the sun. So that is a boatload of miles. That is data in action. That is 3 years ago what has already happened in a lot of the world. And that is what is coming to bear on healthcare and education. Now, Mike kind of nailed it yesterday when he talked about how fast things are changing, how worrisome that is if we don't get in front of the change, and how hard it is for leaders to control anything anymore with the way technology is working and communications is working. I'm blessed in my work because I sometimes get to think about these changes from the perspective of the satellite that took this photo. Often board members can look down at the organization and see the beauty and the potential of change, which can be imagined even if it can't yet be seen, and that's really important. But at the ground level, and I think this is Katrina. Chairs and tables, even buses and roofs are flying through the air. People are getting crushed by this beautiful image of, all of the water molecules jumping around together. And I see a lot of the crushing that is going on in my healthcare and education work. So my hope in the next few minutes is to kind of give you a sense of what good can come and what we need to do to create it. All right, so let's look at what's happening in healthcare. What is the signal within all the noise of Obamacare, failed insurance exchanges, Kentucky One laying off hundreds of people, and prices rising like crazy? I think kind of like the story of the kid mucking out the stall because he believes there's a pony in there. There is a pony in here. And that pony is that the Affordable Care Act, perhaps accidentally, has smashed the business model of insurance companies, of health insurance companies, companies like Humana, and forced them to innovate or die. I don't know if people still remember, but a couple of weeks after the Affordable Care Act passed, Humana laid off 2,500 people, the majority of them in Louisville. It's an existential event in the company's history. The old way of doing business was not going to work anymore. This has unleashed a barrage of investment in analytics, in data creation, in physician management organizations, and different ways of understanding and seeing how health and well-being are created. Humana has spent about $3.5 billion since then acquiring capabilities and information technology and analytics and management systems. All of that in addition to filling a lot of the office buildings near where we are sitting right now with people from all over the planet who understand IT and how to analyze. That's not unique to Humana. Not only big companies, but little companies are doing it. There's another either dot-com boom or bubble emerging in companies going public on the belief that they can re-engineer the healthcare world around knowledge and information and the consumer. It's an exciting time. So what's new healthcare going to look like? Some of it is actually kind of understandable. The most understandable stuff is sort of the Human Genome Project. The ways that big data is allowing us to understand that a type of cancer, colon cancer or breast cancer, is not actually one disease, but dozens or hundreds of different ones, and that they can be treated with much more personalized molecules. That's actually fairly familiar, and brilliant cancer specialists are probably going to be armed with ever better weapons. But bigger changes are coming from data, from analytics. And let me give two examples. Neither of them is even remotely connected with medical care. Probably everybody in the room knows that as people age, the damage done by falls is ever more dangerous. In fact, one of the leading causes of the final illness that leads to death is a fall that puts somebody in the hospital, all right? It's a big problem. Several years ago, Humana acquired a piece of what had been Google Health's emerging, big vision for healthcare that enabled us to analyze what was happening among all the members we were responsible for and predict what problems might emerge. We became able to identify older, frail members who might be at risk for falling based on what had happened to them before. Now that's interesting, but it's sort of, if you look at a person and they look frail, they're probably at risk of falling. That triggered a home visit. The home visit triggered specific knowledge. Oh, look, there's a shower that you have to step over the bathtub to get into, greatly increasing the risk of falling. Now that's also interesting, but kind of common sense. The magic came from the fact that in this new model of healthcare, this big, powerful organization had an incentive to look in the civil sector and find, oh, look, there's an organization of retired carpenters in this city, and one of the things they like to do is go install shower rails. So the home visit triggers a call to the community organization, and the retired carpenter puts in a shower rail, and that pays for itself thousands of times over. That triggers lots more innovation and intervention to avoid other things that might happen. That is the magic in big data. It's the human interface between what is predictable and the action that can take place. Let me just quickly go through the next one. This is a little bit more complicated, but obesity epidemic is a big deal. I'm not going to bore you with all the data. Kentucky is worse. This is a big problem for our community. And it is understandable and knowable. Companies like Humana know what the result is going to be. And the result is unhealth, great expense, and if you get, for example, adult onset if you get adult diabetes as a juvenile, great misery and early death. That can be prevented by changes in behavior, but we have all of these social challenges. We've got food deserts. We've got lack of education on how to eat. People don't cook. All of these kinds of things. Well, what's happening is the insurers, the hospitals, if they're bearing risk for health status, government are beginning to invest in basically incentive programs that over time will pay people through bonuses, through things that they value, frequent flyer miles, iPads, whatever, for changing their behavior. I see a day when, the cost of eating an unhealthy fast food item compared to eating an apple could be way higher because of the foregone benefits coming out of the health status. Now, the thing that's exciting here is your magic phone knows where you are. It can talk to you. It can gather information. It can bring you coupons so you can buy some things cheaper and forego other things. There's a lot of opportunity here, and the changing world is, I think, is going to turn around this big population health problem. Now, one of the things about all of this big data stuff, it's pretty scary because we worry that we may lose our individuality in it. And my youngest brother, who's an infantry officer in the Marine Corps, reminds me of this pretty bluntly when I start getting all preachy about body mass index and obesity. He says, hey, Dave, you kind of need to tone that down because almost all Marines are obese, according to BMI, especially the big guys who carry the really heavy weaponry. BMI is just a calculation. It's not an actual report of life status. It's really important that we look for the human interface, that we figure out what the data means. And in healthcare, there's a long way to go in that, but there's great promise. And I actually think that Mike Harold was too gloomy in his worrying about jobs, because I think the kinds of jobs that open up in coaching and human interaction are very difficult to foresee, but they're going to be a big deal. All right, let's jump quickly to education. I've been involved in education-related work here in Louisville and at the national level for a long time. Since I joined the school board a little more than a year ago, the most impressive thing that I've discovered is the quantity and quality of data within JCPS. It's quite amazing. There are a lot of questions that if you can think to ask them, you can get a response that is based on actual information. And this can go down to the level of the classroom and in many cases, the individual child. It's really impressive. We also had a report last year from the state that showed that for the first time in memory, JCPS achieved its goals on an aggregate basis in continuous improvement terms. So there is a lot of good stuff going on in JCPS. There are encouraging signs that Dr. Hargens and her team are starting to get it done. But just as the battles against the frailties of aging and the trials of the modern food culture have a long way to go, so too in education we've barely begun. Education data points us to a lot of impediments to student learning. The fun ones are the things about education is boring and kids watch, they play so many video games that chalkboard doesn't work anymore. And it's actually incredibly inspiring to see a teacher in Louisville, and I've seen high school teachers talking to a room full of kids who have brought their own smartphone and are giving constant feedback back and forth between teacher and student, so the teacher always knows when the kids are getting it and when they're not. These new technologies and new understandings and the ability to find where the kids are, that's kind of like cancer care. The technology and the data can get us better and better at pinpointing where in the math set did David fall off? How do we go catch him up? What vocabulary does he lack? And that's really cool. That's really exciting. But there's other data. There's data that shows that 12% of JCPS's students are homeless for part of the year. I mean, the kids who Kathy pointed out, those are our kids. And as James so rightly said, they're not just their kids, they're all of our kids. We know that in some schools, barely 10% of entering sixth graders are proficient in math. And we know who those kids are. We know the names of the homeless kids. We know exactly, because we've got all this great data. The challenge right now is what we do about it. Where is the retired carpenter who we can put to the task? Now, as a board member, it's hard to know how to trigger human innovation, but the outlines are emerging. We've got to change the role of teachers. Teachers don't need to be the content expert anymore, and their authority will no longer come from being the content expert, because your phone will have more knowledge about anything than any other human will. The roles of coach, of mentor, of tough leader for the kids who need it, all of those, though, are very much available. And I'm happy to say that as we look at what's happening in the system, and I encourage all of you to look at what happens. Don't just look at what's said, because we have a leadership team right now that acts through action rather than talk. Look at who's been promoted. Okay, look at our chief academic officer, Dewey Hensley, who was the turnaround principal at Atkinson Elementary, who made it work in a deep poverty environment. Look at Michelle Dillard, the principal who turned around Seneca and was just named an assistant superintendent. And look at Houston Barber, who just moved from turnaround Fern Creek to go down to Shawnee High School. Action is happening based on data, based on results, and I'm very encouraged by it. So I meant to leave you with one really pithy good thought, okay? Big data creates a sense of urgency, but it has to be used at the individual level. I think I sort of got this wrong. It's not just the data at the individual level, it's the human action that it triggers. What is the action? What are we each going to do? In the healthcare world, that means we've got to believe and know that with all the bumps in the road, exchanges are going to work, people are going to be insured, and we have to get on to creating health. We have to get on to using the data to reinvent the world of the role of the doctor, and to reinvent the role of non-medical institutions in creating well-being. We have to figure out how to communicate all of this to millennials and make them excited about working in this, or otherwise they won't want to work in big insurance companies or stodgy old hospitals. All right? And I'm happy to say that Humana has just adopted a big goal to fire up its people, and it's got me fired up. The goal is all the communities that Humana serves by 2020 will have 20% better health. That is a big deal. No idea how we will create it, but the leadership has jumped off, they've jumped out of the plane and they're hoping their parachute's going to work. In education, it means we've got to invest in new teaching. Okay? We've got to understand we need to train teachers in this new world. We've got to get them understanding of digital offerings so they can pick from the cornucopia wisely that's on the internet. And we've got to build a feedback system so that the industrial model of every certified teacher is the same can give way to, personalized feedback. How can you do better with the kids who you're with? We've got to pay for all of this stuff, and we've got to pay for it by relentlessly eliminating manifestations of the old system that are no longer relevant. And this is where the community is going to have to be demanding. Dr. Cosby is going to talk to us in a minute about Simmons, but I think strategically one of the great ironies is Simmons has one huge advantage today. And the advantage is it has almost no faculty. It's starting on a clean slate to take from this cornucopia. Boy, that is a tricky issue for universities and other educators. So, to succeed in education, we're also going to have to deal with the reality that poverty and family breakdown lie at the root of an awful lot of our issues. In healthcare, the broken issues can often be paid for by avoiding expensive medical procedures. You save the money in one place and put it in another. It's harder to do in education. We don't really have a model of how to take from the education system and put it into housing for kids. But I'll end with a challenge to the community. We know which kids are showing up for kindergarten way behind. We know what to do about that. We have activities going on. United Way, the mayor, and 55K are working on early childhood. We can, as a community, at least get involved to get kids more ready for school. The data will help us find it, and we can all be the carpenter who does something to help little kids on their way. I'll close with just one little funny illustration that this is all real. This is not just Nerdville or capitalist nirvana figuring out how to capitalize on big data. One of my colleagues was tutoring her niece was talking to her niece, reading with her. The niece is getting ready for kindergarten, and she's learning her letters. And so the question was, circle the letter A and draw a picture of something that starts with A. Well, we drew an apple, and the thing on the right is an app. All right? And to the 5-year-old, it's just like breathing. A is for app. What's her world going to hold? What are the possibilities? And how can we focus on her to bring out the very best in her through all of this magical technology? That, I think, is a fabulous opportunity for all of us who are alive today. Thank you.